Hi, Homeworthy. I'm Frank Webb. Welcome to my home in upstate New York.
You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
My name is Frank Webb. I'm one of the founders of New York City interior design firm White Webb, and we're here today in my home in Dutchess County. We're in the Hudson Valley of New York. I first learned of this area by happenstance. There was an article in the New York Times featuring a home in this town, which I thought was interesting. It was a mid-century modern. Came up to see the house, and I actually couldn't get in. It was pouring rain, but we fell in love with the area and just said, this is a place we should investigate further. So we made our way here almost 20 years ago now. And when we first came here, there was a home on this property. We fell in love with the property, but not the home so much. We thought we could just do some initial tweaks. So we engaged Eric Gartner of SPG Architects to come talk to us, help us think through what we might want to do to shake things up a little bit and make it ours. But as we got into deeper conversation with him, we realized that tweaks alone weren't going to cut it. So we gave him the green light to design us a new home. So when we started the process, I had all these fantasies about what we might do. I liked the idea of sort of a main core of the home that was all the entertaining spaces, and then having separate bridges that went off to like the primary bedroom suite, another one to the guest bedroom area. And Eric designed us something gorgeous, which was exactly that, but unfortunately we couldn't afford to build it. So we unfortunately had to have him go back to the drawing board. And what you're seeing today is the results of his kind of streamlining exercise. And while we were disappointed at first, we couldn't be happier with the end result. It really suits our needs. I think it sits on the property so much more nicely than the original home might have. And it brings us great joy. Clearly, foyer sets the stage for the home. Right? I was dealing with a relatively constrained space here, but I still wanted it to be dramatic and have a sense of style. And I also didn't want to have the reveal happen too quickly of the living room. So part of the way that we created this ability to have a surprise moment was by placing this fireplace here. And it is a double-sided fireplace. And on this side, we used a frosted glass. And on the other side, within the living room, we used a clear glass. And the reason for that is it maintained a little bit more privacy if you were in the living room and somebody was coming to the front door. But it also created a really beautiful situation in the wintertime when the fire is aglow, and the evening, as guests arrive, it's very dramatic to see this flickering glow in the fireplace. Above the fireplace, we have this sort of cutout area, which I'll explain a little bit more about later. But within it, I clad that section in a wallpaper from Philip Jeffries that's actually covered in a crushed stone. So it's a very super subtle detail, so it won't just detract from the artwork, but it's a great backdrop and adds a whole other level of layer to the design. So hanging above the fireplace is this really cool artwork, I think, by Dan Wiesendanger. It was done in the 1960s, and he was known for kind of creating the movement of geometric abstraction. So to me, it looks almost like a stained glass window. But what I love about it is that it's got this irregular shape to it. And now that it's set within this square niche, it accentuates the fact that it is an unusual shape. And I think as somebody entering the home for the first time, it makes you think, oh, we're going to be in to see something we don't see everywhere. So continuing down the hallway, the reason it is a hallway is that we created this partial wall to be a division from the living room, but also to maintain this idea or feeling of openness to the ceiling. So for this section of the hallway, rather than focusing on a big piece of art, I thought it might be better to do something that felt a little bit more architectural and sculptural. And I found these gorgeous candlesticks from Sculptuna. And what I thought could be interesting is to accentuate the length of the hall and have this beautiful geometric repetition. What's nice about them too is that they have this sort of soft glimmer because of their unlacquered brass. And I don't know, everybody seems to love them, and I'm clearly a huge fan. Below it, I found this vintage bench with a super sculptural base, which is really cool looking. And then flanking it are two tables from a collection that we once had called Clearly Classic. So they're acrylic tables in a variety of designs. It's something that we sold at one time through Dongia. And this is sort of the latest acquisition that we had, and I absolutely love it. It's a piece of glass artwork from Massimo Micheluzzi, who is a Venetian glass maker, a glass artisan. And you know, ordinarily you wouldn't think that this is glass, right? It almost looks like a ceramic. But what he's done is he's taken opaque glass and he's been inspired by the floors of St. Mark's in Venice. And so you have these amazing designs, all created out of glass. So then in this hallway, this is where you're seeing the bump outs that are on the front of the house, these cedar clad areas. One is a closet, a coat closet. Another one is a powder room. And then down the other end of the hall, we have this other niche that rather than enclose, we kept it as a niche that could be used for a console table. And here again, you'll see another one of our former furniture lines, which was called Intaglio. And it really was a great representation of our design process because it's a mix of the classical and the modern. And what we've done here is we took these antique engravings and we had them silk screened onto these modern wooden forms. So it's old, but it's new, and it's a very bold statement in a home that's focusing on largely minimalism, but I feel like it works. It's nice to have a little flourish here or there. And then on top of it, we've placed this, I think, beautiful glass vase from Naso Moretti, another Venetian glassmaker, that is just so bold and colorful and happy that I love it. And another great thing about this area is that this mirror that we've hung here creates a nice kind of optical illusion where it makes it seem as if we've got a full round tabletop here because it's repeating the design, but it also reflects what's happening outside in the back of the home with the great landscape. This hallway gives you access into the living room, but it also leads directly to the kitchen. I'll show you the kitchen a little bit later, but what I wanted to point out is the beautiful sight line that you have down this hallway. You've got this long view, and it is centered on this plantings that we have out on the dining patio. And then, I'm not sure if you can really see it on camera right now, but we have these amazing sweet gum trees at the very end that frame everything beautifully. The home that we wound up with is essentially a rectangle that's about 25 feet wide by 75 feet long. We have this soaring ceiling height in the sort of the main entertaining section of the home, which is on one end, and that afforded us the ability to create sort of a stacked setup of bedrooms on the far end. So it's almost like a split level, but of the nicest kind. So when you encounter the home from the outside, what you see in front is largely an opaque facade. We wanted to keep it relatively private on the front. So you have the main core of the building is kind of a stucco. And then we have a series of cedar bump outs, which afford us opportunities for a closet, a powder room, a console area in the front of the home. And what gives it light there, though, is we have a glass door at the entry and then a series of clerestory windows at the top. And what's really beautiful about that is you get this phenomenal view of the tree canopy and light streaming in, but in a very kind of quiet way. So you enter into a foyer And from the foyer, you can extend into the living room, dining area, kitchen, which is all sort of very open plan. And from there, you have a staircase that goes up to the guest bedrooms. There are two of them. And then that same staircase wraps around below, and you encounter the primary bedroom. And then finally, because the property slopes from front to back, we have a walkout area below, which is a media room and an office/library. So now that I've shown you the foyer, let me take you on into the living room. So as I mentioned before, I really wanted to have much more of a reveal moment. And even though you catch a glimpse of what's happening in the living room from the foyer, it's a very different experience once you step into the room. It's almost the first time that you recognize the height of the ceilings, which are 12.5 feet. It's the same in the foyer, but because you're in a more compact space, I don't think it necessarily registers with you at first. So when you walk into the living room, first off, you see the expanse of the room itself, which includes the dining room beyond. But you also get the phenomenal views to the outside. So before we get into the interior design, let's talk a little bit about the architecture of the space. Again, we worked with Eric Gartner of SPG Architects, and I think he came up with some really brilliant details in this room in particular. What you'll see, though, is a real mix of materials at play, which I think is important. As equally important for soft furnishings in a home and in the interior design, but also with regard to the architecture. You want to see this dynamism that's created by having a variety of materials. Here we have polished concrete floors throughout, which are all radiant heated, and Eric persuaded us to keep these structural steel beams exposed, and I absolutely love it. It really gives it that sort of beefy industrial feel that counterbalances kind of perfectly with some more sophisticated furnishings in the room. So you really get that kind of interesting play at work. Another thing worth noting in this room, if you look to the ceiling, is that all of the recessed lights are not in a grid pattern. It's very sort of natural, and it looks like a field of stars when they're on at night. And this is a technique that SPG had used in prior of their projects, and I absolutely loved it. And I think it looks terrific here as well. It's something that, again, you're introducing something that's organic into a space that's otherwise very rectilinear. And it helps to just make it feel more alive. So again, when we're talking about materials, you've got the polished concrete floors, you've got the steel beams, and then you have the millwork that you see in the distance there, which is covered in a chestnut, which is a really nice, warm counterbalance to these other elements in the room. So another thing I wanted to point out about the architecture is, frequently in a contemporary home, detailing is next to none, right? Or it's very simple. But what Eric came up with here, which I think was kind of brilliant, were these sort of cutout details, right? Which you don't have moldings here, but it's almost like a reverse molding, or the opposite of a molding, where you have these extractions from the architecture. And I think it creates this really beautiful rhythm throughout the space, and it's a little bit surprising. So partly what you see happening, and we'll see more of this later, but it starts with a very kind of interesting staircase railing and the cutout that emerges from there. And then you see the extractions over the fireplace, this other one over the wall that extends down to the staircase below. And even from an artwork hanging perspective, Eric came up with the idea of doing this recessed channel, which accentuates all of the other details in the room. So I think it's very subtle, but really beautiful and unexpected. So in terms of interior design, really the starting point for us in this room was this massive photograph. It's a beautiful piece by Massimo Vitali, and he's known for doing typically crowd scenes, oftentimes on beaches or ski slopes. So this one was a little bit of a departure. It's actually some sort of a picnic that was happening in Paris. This is the Luxembourg Gardens. And what we loved about it was making an immediate connection to the outdoors. You're seeing the same kind of greenery that's at play right outside of the windows. What I also loved about it is the perspective, where you have these gorgeous pleached trees forming this, this visual line that's incredibly geometric and has the same sort of presence at the far end of the room. So if you're sitting in the dining room, you're looking at this, yes, you're not seeing the detail of all the different people, but you get the beautiful geometry of the piece. What I also love is I'm always drawn to figurative art. And so here you can just stand here and look at these faces all day long. There's something to imagine about each one of the people that's on view here. I had a bit of a challenge in sort of designing the layout for this room. What I wanted to be able to do was to host a largish crowd and make them all feel that they were together. But at the same token, we wanted to be comfortable for just two people to sit here as well. Well, it would have been a more conventional layout, probably would have been to create two sitting areas, one flanking the fireplace and then another one beyond. I felt that that was going to be a little bit too choppy and it really wouldn't encourage this sort of group dynamic in the room. So the other thing I was trying to do was to maintain access to the windows so people could walk up freely and see the view. And I think the solution to this was this beautiful sofa by Vladimir Kagan. It's called the Serpentine sofa. And what's nice about it is it gives me a 14-foot length, which is really expansive. And it gives the ability to create seating areas, progressive seating areas along it. And what's also nice about it is that the curve helps to break up the rectilinearity of the room. And it also creates this really sort of soft passageway from other parts of the home to the dining and the kitchen area. This had to function as a main thoroughfare in addition to being a seating spot. So I think it did a really good job in a space that's not terribly wide, but it makes it feel expansive. So in terms of a palette for this room, since it's so open to the exterior, I wanted to make sure that it felt it was connected, and I didn't want it to compete too much with what was going on the outside. So, of course, then, what color do I choose to bring in? But it's green, which is what I did through this sofa. Everything else in the room is fairly neutral, and there's not a ton of, at least, bold pattern at play, because, again, I wanted it to be really more about the view outside. So as far as the furnishings go, you're not seeing a whole lot of antiques in my home, even though our practice is known for blending antiques into the design. But there is one exception to the rule in this room, which is this armchair by the fireplace. It's something that was known as a chaise de malade, which essentially translates into illness chair or sickness chair. And it was something that it dates from the 1700s, and it actually reclines. And so that was the whole concept of it being a chair that if you were not feeling well, it was a place to go and rest. So what I like about it is that even though it's a much more traditional antique piece, it's very simple. And it's a Louis XVI kind of design with very straightforward legs. I also love the idea that it had these sort of ears, if you will, on the back of the chair that helped relate to the other curved elements in the room. And then to modernize it just a little bit, I had it reupholstered in two different fabrics, two different linens. That one is probably the boldest pattern in the room, but still something that doesn't hit you over the head. It's pretty soft and subtle. Another thing I tried to do here is to introduce a little bit of levity. I didn't want it to feel too formal. And so you'll see these sort of fun little pops along the way. One of which is kind of the pairing that I did here of this tiny little floor lamp next to this big chair. It's something that kind of, it makes people laugh when they see it. They think the proportions are funny. But what's great about it too is that it gives us another way of getting a lower level of light into the room. As you all probably know, most designers hate the idea of overhead lighting, right? And not that it's bad, but you really need to have a balance. So if you've got light coming from the floor, from coves, from mid-tiered lamps, it helps to make the process, make the lighting that much better in the home and make everything, show everything to its better advantage. So that was one thing here. What you'll also see is another table from our Clearly Classic collection, which we designed very reminiscent of some of the Egyptian furniture designs that were taking the form of animals and turning them into furniture. So we called this Cleo after good old Cleopatra. But I think it's a fun element, and it helps to diminish the seriousness of the space. In a similar mode, some of the artworks over here, I'm a huge fan of Damon Crane, the curator of a gallery called Culture Object, where he brings all sorts of modern artists together and with a focus on functional art. So one piece here is this, you know, he just looks so fun, doesn't he? I mean, it's a piece by Maxwell Mostardo, and it's a vase that he's then covered with like a PVC rubber coating that's in an ombre from a dark blue to a like fluorescent green. And he calls it an anthropophora, which is a hybridization of the words amphora, which is the shape of the vase, and then anthropomorphic. So, because it looks sort of humanistic by virtue of what he's done with the arms on the piece. So, to me, it's just a lot of fun. And this sculpture here seems very Modigliani-like, but it's not. And it's just another piece, another figurative piece that I was attracted to. And then over here, this is a resin piece by Kate Rohde, and it's frankly weird, right? I mean, it looks like seaweed come to life, and you can't help but smile when you look at something like that. So again, in terms of the furniture layout, you have sort of a seating area that takes place in this spot here in the room, another one in the middle because of this bench that we've created here by the fireplace, so you've got another conversation area happening. And then at the very end, we have this really beautiful pair of Rob's John Gibbings chairs that are from the 1950s that are very simple again. You can see sort of a connection between the straight lines of the piece with the other chair on the opposite end of the room. But what's nice about it too is that I've kept the pattern to something that's very subtle, because in addition to the pattern that you see here, there's also a gorgeous pattern that's made just by the webbing of the chair itself. So it gives you a whole another view, particularly from the back of the chair. At the middle of the space, I have this, I think, incredible coffee table by Frederiksen Stallard, which is all these cut logs. And in terms of humor, another aspect of it is this is a gas fireplace, which clearly can't use the wooden logs. So I think there's something funny in that as well. It's, in some respects, not the most practical piece in the world, as things can fall in the cracks, but it's worth it, I think, for the visual. It's the sort of piece that we could have covered with a glass top, but to me that just sort of would have diminished it and would have been at odds with what the original intent of the piece was. And then here, sitting by these chairs, is kind of an unusual ottoman that was designed by Kelly Harris Smith and won a design competition a number of years ago. It's again, just another fun, sort of half a mushroom kind of shape. And then lastly, in this corner, we have a light fixture, which is actually, from what I understand, I purchased it from Fred Silberman, the antiques dealer, and their assumption is that it was a prototype done in the 1960s by an Italian lighting company that never actually made its way to market. But if you notice, it's got kind of an unusual shape with, which we affectionately refer to as the Heine lamp. And then underneath it all here, I designed this rug in conjunction with Crosby Street Studio, which is just very simple. It's got a little textural detail to it, but I wanted the color to more or less coordinate with the floors of the room, because I didn't want your eye to stop here when you looked from across the room. I wanted to see sort of a textural difference, but I wanted to keep the expansive nature of the floor when you viewed from the dining room. As a transition between these areas, we have this millwork here, which houses a bar and glassware and other things of that nature. But what's nice about it is it gives us a corner in the living room to play with. And in that corner, we've added this, I think, gorgeous plant. It's an anthurium ruffles, and which is loving it here. And I think it's just a beautiful sculptural element that, again, makes another connection to the outdoors. What's nice about this added corner, too, is it gives us a little bit of a blockage of view to the kitchen when you're in the living room. And on this side here, this enormous folding screen is something that we actually created for a show house a number of years ago. We were finished with the show house and like, well, I have ceilings that can accommodate it, so why not? And I really love that it's this softening element in the room. There's a sort of neoclassical element to it that somehow works in this mix as well. And what I thought about doing at one point was adding casters to it so that I could have actually drawn it around here and had more of a reveal when we do a dinner party. But it's one of many projects that have yet to be done. So when you make your way into this end of the space, we have the kitchen, which is covered in the same chestnut cabinetry as the millwork that separates it from the living room. And fortunately, I have a very clean chef as a husband. And so really what you see for the most part is just some neat, tidy cabinetry. The countertops are a white quartzite, which has got a beautiful kind of depth to it and reflects light. And we also wanted to maintain the openness of the space. So instead of doing a range hood, we have a downdraft behind the stovetop. So it keeps your eye focused on the exterior as opposed to equipment and appliances within this part of the room. In the dining area, I know it doesn't exactly scream country house, but I found this table and fell in love with it and decided, okay, I'm going to up the glam factor just a little bit. So this is a design by Piero Fornasetti, who started something called the Art Print Shop in 1930 in Italy. And ultimately, from his print shop, he wound up creating an atelier that then started to form furniture and housewares with his designs. So I think it's an absolutely beautiful piece. Many of you are probably familiar with the work because his son Barnaba has taken over the company and done a lot to promote the work across the world. You've probably seen plates of his design and possibly other pieces of furniture as well. What I loved about it was this emerald green color and this beautiful design of these concentric circles, which are meant to be cameos or coins. And I just think it's a beautiful other sort of classical element that we introduced to the space, even though it's a mid-century design. What I did also is I paired it with these chairs, which are from Dongia, and they're known as the Anziano chair. And it's a modern take on the Greek klismos chair, so this beautiful curved back. But what I love about them as well is that their color tone works beautifully with the gold and green of the table. It also makes a nice bridge to the millwork beyond. And what's also working nicely with these are the legs of the chairs. If you see them, they're very sculptural, they're very open frame, and they work really nicely with the base of the table, which is just a solid pedestal. So from across the room, in the living room, when you're looking toward this, you get the beautiful sculptural aspect of the chair bases. And then when you approach the table, the chairs recede, and really what you're seeing are just the simple brown leather, and then suddenly the tabletop comes into view, and that's the star of the show. To light it all, I found these fixtures from Angelo Mangiarotti and assembled them in this, I just made up this different hanging heights to create this sort of feeling of a cascade of light. And what's interesting about them too is that they wind up mimicking the stripes within the artwork beyond it. So what I love about this art, it's a piece by Susan Silton, a Los Angeles-based artist. And although it's very different from the Massimo Vitali on the other side of the room, I feel like there's a dialogue that's created between them from the sort of the bold geometry, the color, and Similarly, the way that the Vitali can be appreciated from this distance, this piece can be appreciated from the opposite end of the room in the living room. And what's curious about it, if you study it closely, I'm not sure if you can pick this up, but your eye is immediately drawn to these, rainbow colored stripes, but there's actually something else going on. This is a sort of a veil on top of a film still beneath it. And the film still is from a 1950s apocalyptic film called On the Beach. And it's a series, it's a film that talks about the survivors of a nuclear war. So this at the top, if you can see, is Gregory Peck's face. And below him is Ava Gardner, and she's leaning on his chest and embracing him. So it's clearly not a cheery message, but it's a great conversation starter at dinner. So there's a lot of openness in this room because of these sliding glass doors as well as the glass panels above. And what this leads to is an outdoor dining patio that we have. I'll talk to you about that a little bit later when we get outside, but it's a nice connection between the interior and the exterior. So just over 20 years ago, Matthew White and I formed a slightly unusual design partnership. Unusual in the respect that we're both very different people. He comes from the Western US, I'm from the East. He had studied ballet at the School of American Ballet in New York City, and I went to the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He had a prior career in antiques, I had one in finance. He's a Leo and I'm a Virgo, right? So these are things that normally should not work together, but for us, they do. And I think it's kind of the core of our design partnership is this idea of opposites attracting and how you make opposites work together. He is a classicist and I'm a modernist, which is a little bit of an unusual combination. But what we find is that most people want something that's in between. And we frequently view it as like a shower regulator. And from hot to cold, so from classicist to modernist, and every client is going to fall differently on that spectrum. So what our job is to identify where they fall and design something that speaks to their needs and ideally brings them joy. That's a key motivating factor of our design process is what makes you happy. So, ordinarily people wouldn't think this kind of a combination works, but it does. And the reason it does is because I think we're both exceptional communicators. And we're also really both interested in learning, and what each of the other of us brings to the table is fascinating to us. So I think what you see there is this synergy that winds up being created between these two different, not opposing, but different viewpoints. And that, we think, elevates the design for our clients. Because we spent the last 20 years trying to reconcile different design styles, we've become very adept at helping people understand what their design style is. And with couples, it's also very effective too, because we understand how to reconcile potentially conflicting viewpoints. Our goal in the process is always to make sure that everybody feels heard and that you wind up creating this sort of middle ground that doesn't feel like a middle ground, right? There shouldn't be a need for compromise. There should be a way that you make each person feel like they've been heard and they really enjoy the home that you've designed for them. So now that we've finished the tour of the kitchen area here, let me take you on up to the guest bedrooms. So in this far corner of the living room, we have a staircase that goes up to the guest bedrooms. What's also very interesting is this stair railing that Eric Gardner designed, which is actually made of corian. So it's very simple, but very sculptural. And we also have it backlit so that at night there's a soft glow that comes at the railing as well. So if you come up the stairs, you get to a nice little landing with an overlook to the staircase below that leads down to the primary bedroom. But what we did here is we weren't dealing with a ton of space. So we wanted to really focus on almost like you were designing rooms for a ship, right? Everything to be very sort of built in, compact. And what's nice about the way that this is built within the home is that these guests can be as messy as they want to be and we will never see it. So come on into the blue bedroom. So this room actually has the best view in the house, a view down to the pool and the pond beyond that. As I said before, the bedrooms were the area that I decided to depart a little bit when it came to color. Where all the walls elsewhere might be white, in these rooms I did bolder color choices. So in this room it's a really beautiful periwinkle blue color that is frequently matches the sky outside. And since I didn't have a whole lot of wall space, I decided to design the bed and upholster it in a fabric that was very similar to the wall color. Again, limited space, so all of the storage is built in. And when we designed these rooms, we also wanted to make sure that we afforded enough space to give them each their own bathroom. We figured for guests, the idea of privacy was something that was more important to them rather than a larger room. So we have individual bathrooms for each of the two guest bedrooms. In the bedroom here, because I was dealing with limited space, I wanted to find small nightstands. And these were a beautiful pair of stone-clad pieces that I found through a gallery in Florida. And I just like the fact that they're whimsical. They almost have that anthropomorphic kind of look to them as well. And they do afford a little bit of storage within them. I didn't want to do table lamps because I wasn't dealing with large tables. I also didn't want to do wall sconces because I felt there was a certain bulk involved with them. So instead, I found these lights from Azucena, which are actually meant to be used on the back of a sofa. So like a reading light on the sofa back. But I thought, why not use them here as a reading light for the bedroom? And they actually work out great. I love the look. There are leather straps and these natural or unlacquered brass lamp heads that make for a great look. And then on the bed itself, this is a gorgeous fabric from Dongia, this sort of woven texture that introduces a little bit of pattern into the space. From an artwork perspective, we have this still life, this sort of cubist still life that I found that I feel just sort of pops beautifully against the periwinkle blue wall and is just a very kind of soothing scene as well. Another little interesting piece in the room is this box, which is a ceramic box that I just thought was incredibly beautiful. Again, sourced through the culture object. And this is something by an artist named Judy Mackenzie, who's a British artist. And it represents two different forms of design, one of which is called narikomi, where you take different layers of different colored clay and you form these gorgeous patterns from them. And the other is called kintsugi, which I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's this silver inlay which is put wherever there are imperfections or cracks in the piece. It's something that was done in Japanese design originally just to repair pottery, but it grew into an art form in its own because it was sort of the perfect representation of wabi-sabi, which is this whole idea of finding the beauty in imperfection. So I don't know, there's a lot going on with this little piece. And then if we go into the bathroom, so both bathrooms are designed very similarly in that there's a combination of a large format porcelain tile that has a sort of terrazzo-like pattern to it. And then what I did is I used a resin countertop material from 3Form in each of the bathrooms. And what I did is I had them follow the lead color from the respective bedroom. So this is a little bit unusual to see something like that, but I think the color is gorgeous and really grounds the space and makes a nice connection with the room beyond. I also designed the bathroom so that knowing the door would be open 90% of the time, I didn't want to be staring at a toilet. So it's organized in such a way that the toilet is out of view. Another thing that we make a point of doing when we're designing bathrooms is to make sure that the shower controls are readily accessible, right? So you don't have to go into the shower in order to turn it on. So that's what we did here with a nice little niche for the products beyond. Where possible, I try to keep the products out of immediate sight lines as well. So I think it's just always better to keep those out of view. And there's a cool little seat in the shower as well. And we also have tiny windows in the bathrooms that afford privacy, but also gives you a nice little snapshot view of the greenery outside. So for the second guest room, it doesn't have the same kind of big, expansive view that the other one does, but it still has a nice little view toward the front of the house. And this room I covered in a grass cloth from Philip Jeffries, which is in this kind of beautiful grassy green color, which again makes the connection to the outdoors. It adds some beautiful texture to the room. This space feels much more cosseted than the other guest bedroom. And it's interesting to see who chooses which room, because I think it really says a lot about the different people. In this space, what I did is, again, I designed the bed with attached nightstands in order to keep everything sort of floating. And I upholstered it in a kind of a beautiful tweedy fabric that is in a mix of greens and blues and whites, and then found this fun geometric fabric to serve as a Roman shade above. From an artwork perspective, this was a little bit of fun, where I found these drawings actually at the Affordable Art Fair, and it's by an artist named Masha Suzuki, and what she's done is created these drawings of squirrels with Mexican wrestling masks. So it's a bit of humor. It was my nephew's favorite room just because of these squirrels. I've yet to see them out there, but I'm keeping my eyes peeled. So now that you've seen the guest bedrooms, let me take you down to my bedroom. So here we're back toward the foyer and the other side of the staircase that leads us down to the primary bedroom and then the media room beyond. Sort of marking this end of the hallway and the staircase is this very interesting piece that we found from a local artist, which is essentially a barn door with a bunch of nails in it. But it really makes a beautiful kind of color and shadow statement, and we think it works beautifully here. Again, as we go down the stairs, you get another glimpse of what's going on with the staircase design and that extraction detail that I mentioned before. I think it's a beautiful sculptural element here that, you know, otherwise would have been very sort of ordinary. So the primary bedroom occupies the same space as the two guest rooms above. We also gain a little bit of space because on the back here we have this bump out, which then afforded us the ability to have this nice little sort of reading area here. This is a really comfortable chair from Minotti called the Hopper chair, which originally came in a pony skin, but I had it reupholstered recently in this really kind of gorgeous abstract pattern by Looms by Soleil is the name of the company. And I paired it with this ottoman, which I just designed, which is very simple, the drum-shaped form. But what makes it fun is that sort of pop of orange with the cushion at the top. And then I have these hemisphere feet forming the base. So it just gives it a little something extra. The bed itself sort of set back in a niche type area. And I designed the bed as well as the nightstands. If you noticed, I thought I was being clever at the time in designing the base to look like a couple of W's, as in White Webb. But it actually made a nice, beautifully sculptural form with the two W's coming together. What you'll also see here is another Philip Jeffries wallpaper in this sort of orangey, almost creamsicle type color on the back. The room is largely neutral apart from that, and this comes back to the whole debate about feature walls, which many people are dead set against them, and normally I fall into that camp. But in this room, I decided to take the plunge, and I'm pretty happy with the result. I knew I didn't want this everywhere, so it gave me just a little bit of a touch of color, and which I then carried onto the ceiling in a very subtle way. It's this very sort of pale orange color. When it comes to artwork, again, this room is all figurative art. So we started off with this piece that we fell in love with. So it's by a Berlin-based photography duo called Billy and Hells. And I think it's just got so much mood to this. You don't know what's going on with their expressions, but they're so I don't know, they draw you in. We thought it was really beautiful. We have a fireplace in this room as well, with the TV concealed behind doors above it. And on the mantle, we found this kind of cool drawing that I found at Stair Galleries in Hudson, New York. So I don't know anything about its origins, but I liked its simplicity, and I don't know, it's pointing towards something. And then lastly, sort of the newest addition in the room is this piece, which is a print by Django Hernandez. He was a Cuban-born artist. This makes you feel as if you're looking at a photograph, but it actually isn't. That was a hand-painted original. And I love his technique where he creates these scenes that look as if they're reflected in water. But this, again, is just a print, but his normal technique is to use paint. So if we go around the corner, we come to what we refer to as the dressing room. So it's just a series of closets on one side, and that then leads to the primary bathroom. And then outside, you can go to an outdoor shower just beyond. The primary bathroom has actually gone through a couple of changes since we've been here. But what you'll see is a very sort of neutral and calm envelope. And all of the tile on the walls are thassos, and it's a honed thassos for the two long walls in the room. And then on either end of the room, I decided to do something that was a little bit different, where I took a different sized tile, which is actually textured. So you're just seeing more of a geometry play as opposed to any real difference or great difference in material. And on the floors, I have this micro mosaic, which I think is really beautiful, in Bianco Dolomiti marble. And then for a bit of a bold statement, the tub itself was covered in a marble that was known as mink. So it's very, very graphic, very linear, and it introduces a little bit of pizzazz into the space. The vanity is floating, and it's clad in a warm wood in order to introduce something that felt a little bit more natural and warming into the space. And then the ceiling is a place where I chose to try to warm up the space with this color from Benjamin Moore called Lemon Drops. And what I liked about it, to me, it felt like I was taking another color in the citrus family, if you will, right? We were dealing with the oranges in the primary bedroom, and here we went into another branch of that family. The artwork on the wall is by an artist named Darlene Charnico, and I love it because it almost gives the impression of an abstract landscape. And it's done through a combination of paint, resin, and nails. So I love the textural quality to it, and it just is another enlivening element in the space. Up above is a beautiful light fixture, I think, from Pablo Designs. It's super simple, but I love the reflective nature of the top portion of it. And it sort of mimics what's going on with the two shower heads in the shower beyond. As far as some of the fixtures go in here, the sinks and the faucets are all from La Cava. And I think this is actually a very interesting design. But if I were to do it today, I think I would probably move away from the vessel type sink. I find it's a little bit more practical to have more countertop available as opposed to the sink occupying it. And then the lighting is actually very beautiful and very bright, which is important. And these are some great looking fixtures from Waterworks that I love. It sort of, this striping detail kind of mimics what's happening with the mink marble below. And it also gives it this sort of a quasi-deco feel to it, but still very contemporary and of today. I was in a yoga class last weekend, and what was interesting to me was this principle that was brought up from Hinduism, where they were focusing on parts of the body and how they represent different things. And they may be seemingly opposite, where one thing is about like nourishment, healing, illumination, and that would be associated with the kidneys, let's say. And then you have the adrenal glands, and those are focused on ignition, spark, transformation. But the idea is that they work together to create harmony and good health. So similarly with design, you can be putting things together that feel like they don't belong, but somehow together they wind up elevating the whole. And I think this is further illustration of the point that good design is dynamic. It's a function about taking things that maybe don't conflict necessarily, but they're bringing some opposites together, textures, colors, design periods and styles. They can be made to work together, and in fact, they oftentimes are much better when they're brought together with things that are slightly different ilk. Nobody likes sameness. It winds up creating rooms and homes that are flat and dull. And we've found that that's what we wind up bringing to the table, because as a classicist, he's going to focus on things that have provenance and patina and the sense of the handmade, whereas I will do the same as far as the artisanal aspects of things, but I'm focusing more on the contemporary and in some respects how technology comes into design. So there's an interesting meeting of worlds that happens when we sit around the design table. The next spot I'd like to show you is the media room, so come on down. So at the foot of the stairs, you come into another large open plan space that is a combination of a library / office as well as a media room beyond. What's nice about the media room is that it's in the darkest spot in the home, right? So it's naturally designed for TV watching. And when I designed the space, I wanted to figure out ways where we could break things up to make them feel as if they were different spaces. So I'll get to that in a moment, but sort of the star and starting point for the design here is this massive bookcase, which is painted in this beautiful boysenberry color. I find that, I don't know why, but I'm oftentimes drawn to colors that are in that spectrum from like fuchsia to violet, and this falls right in there. What I also like about it is that it's got, to me, a little bit more personality than a standard red, which is something that you often wind up seeing in libraries. So I like that it was a little bit different. And then for the office area over here, it's I designed this suspended desk that's painted in this sort of warm, egg yolky kind of color that really blends beautifully, I think, with the boysenberry across the space. And I wound up taking both of those colors together when it came to designing the media room. So another nice aspect of the office area here is that we can set it off if we choose to do so. This is a series of sliding panels that can then create a wall with a swinging door within it. So we rarely have occasion to do that, but sometimes if you are on a private Zoom call or whatever, it's a great option to have. The table, the work table here, is just something that was designed by Gilbert Rohde. He was the first design director of Herman Miller. And this piece was probably done about 1940. And it apparently, based on some research I did, is one of the first examples of biomorphic design in American furniture. And if you're not familiar with it, biomorphic just simply means incorporating details of nature, typically natural materials, and more organic forms. So you see that here in that kind of the shape of the table has these curves to the short ends. And the inlay on the table is this beautiful, it's a paldao, which is a Philippine hardwood, which is then inlaid with another lighter material to create this sort of sinuous design in the tabletop. Originally, this would have come with leaves, but by the time I acquired it from a dealer, those were long gone. So we keep it as it is. And then it's paired with these very fun stools that I found from Pascal Boyer. And I just love how their curved form also kind of mimics what's going on with the end of the table. And at times sometimes we do dinner down here as well, just because it's a different spot to enjoy. And what makes it fun, especially at night, is that we have this pierced metal Moroccan lantern above it, which creates these amazing patterns of light on the ceiling, which is very romantic and very, very mood setting. And then across the space, we have the media room, right? And what's kind of nice about this is we have this very simple convex mirror from Mitchell Gold that's hung on the wall there, very minimal frame. But what I like is how that shape distorts the view of the room, but it also reflects the color from the bookcase and brings some of the light from the windows into the space. So to define this area, I designed this rug with Taiping, and I wanted it to incorporate all the colors of the room, to be this soft sort of form. I also wanted it to be round because I think it would help to break up an otherwise rectangular space with a different kind of form. So it incorporates a combination of browns and golds and even very soft pinks. And to me, it's reflective of sort of an agate-like design. For the seating, I wanted stuff to be super comfortable. And I actually found this sofa from Minotti that they no longer make, but it's this kind of beautiful butterfly shape. And what's great about it is that you can fully recline on it. Multiple people can fully recline on it. And it's just a super comfortable area to watch TV. I also found these very cool Italian swivel chairs from the 1960s, which when I originally found them, they were upholstered in a really kind of wild fabric. But I didn't care for that fabric, but I liked the idea of doing something similar. So I found this beautiful fabric from Stucco, which is an ECAT type design, in this kind of strange color combination that worked perfectly in this room. So it kind of draws everything together. And I recently had the sofa reupholstered, and again, just try to pick up on some of the core colors in the room. What you probably can't tell is that the sofa itself is actually sort of a pink type fabric, but it's very subtle. You see the earth tones coming through as well, but it ties everything together really nicely. For the artwork in the room, these are 3 pieces by an artist named Jay Shin, where he takes spray paint that he applies to acrylic in order to create these very geometric designs. So they're very subtle. They're meant to sit on these shelves so that you get the perception of depth. There's the big debate about whether you expose a television or hide it. And given that this was a media room, I thought it made perfect sense that we would just keep it on display. Personally, I'm not really a fan typically of frame TVs, ordinarily because I feel like you're really not fooling anybody. So I would either just prefer to see the set, its modern simplicity on its own, or design some way to hide it altogether. So that kind of concludes the interiors. And if you're still interested, I'd love to show you the outside. When we first got into the process of building this home, well, first off, we didn't think we would be building a home, right? We were just going to be doing some tweaking. But I was excited when we came around to the fact that we were going to be able to build something that was new. I was really thrilled with the opportunity to create something that reflected what I like in design, which is sort of a warm modernism. And I'm very much influenced by Italian design and Japanese design, which sometimes may feel like they are not on the same page, but there are some similarities that you can draw from both of them. One of which is a focus on fine craftsmanship, and the other one is really this way to create a combination of minimalism and elegance. And I'd like to think those are the key motivating factors in the design of this home. For people, the other part of it too is that I'm a designer and I'm working with people who are frequently building homes. And I loved to have the experience of doing it myself, because I felt I could be that much more of a better advocate for my clients who are experiencing the same thing. I will have walked in their shoes and felt their pain and understand where, you need to put a stake in the ground and other places where it may be okay to compromise. But when it comes to the design process, one thing I would highly recommend anybody going into this doing is to have a full team from the very outset. Clearly you start with an architect, but as soon as you possibly can, bring the interior designer into the equation and don't skimp on the landscape. Make sure you factor in landscape design as a budget consideration and a design consideration from the very get-go. You will find that if you stage these things or don't bring them together in the very beginning, you're going to have a less than ideal result, or you're going to encounter even greater expense. So that would be my recommendation. I was the interior designer, and clearly I hired an architect to work with me here, but I also had a landscape architect from the very beginning who was Mario Navera of Navera Williams. And the idea of bringing these creative talents together at the same time, it fosters a different kind of creativity, because you're bringing these professionals to the table that are all bringing different viewpoints to bear, rather than just having one-on-one conversations with you as the client. So that would be my advice for anybody considering the building of a home. So off of the kitchen, again, we have this dining patio that I'd love to show you. So this spot has a really nice view onto one of the more formal aspects of a garden that we have. I use the word formal loosely, but what we tried to do was to have more structured plantings immediately around the house and then go to a more naturalistic landscape beyond. But anyway, you've got a view in this direction toward the garden. And also toward this view is the side of the garage on which we have this espaliered apple tree. And on this side of the patio, this is an espaliered pear tree. As you can see, we've got some pears growing. Out here, I wanted to have a touch of color, and I thought the best way to do it would be to get a glass table. So the table itself is a design from Design Lush, but I had the tabletop custom designed with a glass company. And this is this gorgeous purple color that was reflective of the flowers in our landscape as well. I mean, every year I plant this with the white mandevilla and the purple verbena below. But more broadly in the landscape, we don't have a ton of flowers, but what we do is either purple, white, and sometimes yellow. I just wanted to try to keep a very sort of constrained palette. Not super fussy about that kind of thing, but I just thought it was more restful to see things having a sort of rhythm. Off on to this side here, the patio area kind of wraps the house, and we have some very simple seating with a wonderful view beyond. So as you can kind of see from here, the pond does have a fountain, which unfortunately decided to break on your visit. So I can't show you what that looks like, but it's very subtle, it's simple, it's a straight geyser, but it really is a beautiful, restful thing to look upon from here. On the back of the house, again, you can see that it's largely glass, right? Mostly windows, whereas the front is not. What's another feature that I love about the house, which you can see probably from different views, but is the roof line. And it's peaked, or it's inverted. So the front is low, the back is high, but in addition to that, the roof expands toward the back of the house, so it gets wider. And you have these chamfered corners as well. So it's a very beautiful wing-like kind of detail. And you experience it mostly when you see it from the side of the house. With the landscape, we worked with Mario Navera to come up with a plan that was really made a ton of sense for us. This wasn't a full-time residence, so it needed to be a place that was generally low maintenance. And because of the architecture of the house, we wanted something that felt very structured from a planting plan in the close proximity to the house. But then beyond that, we're in this kind of wild landscape, and we wanted to see everything kind of transition toward the wild. So on this side of the house, you find this kind of L-shaped hedge, which mimics a retaining wall that you'll see on the other side of the front of the house. And its plantings are very simple and straightforward. Japanese painted fern, pachysandra, hydrangea, creeping jenny, nishiki willow. So it's all very kind of simple, and for the most part, nature takes care of it for me. We don't have any kind of irrigation here, like planned sub-irrigation. And for the most part, it works okay. So as part of the hardscape, also, if we go this direction, Well, Mario had designed the idea of this retaining wall, so we would have this flat lawn that we could also make use of. And when we do entertaining, since we have kind of minimal seating up here, oftentimes we'll bring other furniture up onto the lawn to accommodate a larger group. Below the retaining wall, there had been a garden of sorts there that was a sort of a mishmash of stuff. And what we decided to do was turn it into largely a grass garden. So it's a combination of grass, juniper, and fern, but it's all green. It's all very simple. It's very textural, and it's a beautiful thing in the wind, especially once the grass grows its fronds. So, and then coming down the back of the house, we have these stone steps integrated into the landscape, which was, I think, a brilliant design by Mario. And what it also enabled us to do was to avoid the need for a railing. So because it gets built into the landscape and you have just a few stairs and then land, it's this sort of soft, natural progression. And on the abutting the house, we have these planting beds that are just filled with sedum. Again, no fuss, no muss. They don't require a whole lot of watering, which is important since they're also partly under the overhang of the roof. But they do still manage to get enough water where they are. And then toward the back corner, where you see the hedge there, that's where we have our outdoor shower. Similar to what we see going on in the front of the house, where we have these bump out areas that are clad in cedar, we've got a sort of repeated similar detail in the back. This is the primary bedroom, but what's different here is that we have a large window inset within this spot. So we're heading into the outdoor shower area, and this was designed initially by Mario with a combination of walls, if you will, but they're natural walls for the most part. This hedge is unfortunately suffering a little bit right now, but it was more opaque and came to here. And this is ilex. And then beyond, actually wrapping the shower, is witch hazel. And if you come on in, I can show you a little bit more detail. So it's very sort of private and lush, and it's just a wonderful place to come and take a shower. It's not the most private. The hedges aren't absolutely solid, but it's usually just the two of us here. So it's, and I love the featheriness of the leaves on the witch hazel here. Combination of hostas and Jack Frosts surrounding it, and then vinca as a sort of an undergrowth throughout. And another sort of aspect of, the more rectilinear formal design were these pair of hawthorn trees, which we've had pleached, so they look like a very square box. So again, the formality near the house, and then, or the rigidity, and then you move out to the more naturalistic landscape beyond. So toward the front of the house is this fire pit area that we created. The original structure of the home had a few outbuildings, and there was a garage that was on this spot. We weren't going to use the garage, but we thought, well, you know what, let's keep the concrete pad because maybe we can make some use of it. So a few years after we started the process, we did turn this into like a fire pit area. And since it's largely shaded, I just created a fern garden here. So a variety of different ferns, very textural, and a few potted plants on the outside, but really wanted to keep it very simple. And it's really all about the fire pit itself. A fun aspect of the fire pit is the fire pit design itself. It's by Konstantin Slavinsky, and it's made in the shape of a wheelbarrow, which is, I think, interesting looking, but also super practical because we can move it wherever we might need it on the property. And surrounding it are these fun chairs from Init Design, which again, we've got a pop of color going on here with this bold purple. So it's something you see slightly from the house, and it's sort of like, oh, what's going on over there? But it's not, it doesn't really just hit you over the head. And what I also like is that this is probably the best view of the exterior of the home, where you kind of get everything in view. You see the beauty of that roof line and how it, changes from front to back. And again, you're seeing the repetition of these cedar-clad bump outs on the front of the home. It's hard for me to choose a favorite aspect of this house because I love so much of it. But I think first and foremost is the fact that it does feel so open and airy. We have very tall ceilings. It's a very different experience from New York City, where we live in an apartment that, naturally feels more confined. So I love the lightness and the spiritual uplift that I get when I come here. And the fact that we are so connected to nature really makes this phenomenal. We fell in love with this property because of the nature of the landscape. We have a pond, there's a naturalistic shaped pool, and it's just a lovely vista. And that's something that's so restful. So for me to just simply sit out on the back patio and gaze at the view, that's one of the most wonderful things about this home. And then I just feel like it's very relaxed, while at the same time, not your typical country home. A lot of people might say, oh, this is not my idea of a country home, because it's a little bit more, in some respects, it may be slightly more formal, a little bit more sophisticated. There's a real focus on design, and it makes me happy. So here we are back at the front of the house, and just to show you again, these cedar-clad bump outs that are the defining part of the front of the home's architecture. Again, very different from front to back, but cohesive in the repetition of some of the details, right? The same materials, again, having modest bump outs reappear in other sides of the home. This also, I don't believe we talked about before, but this is a retaining wall that we put in that winds up creating a sort of privacy for the outdoor shower, and it creates another area in which we can plant in front of it. We kept all the plantings very simple in the front of the house. They're ferns and vinca, and the vinca is beautiful in the springtime, where we get a combination of purple and white flowers, and the ferns are actually year-round. So it's nice to be able to keep the texture at play even in the winter months. Another beautiful thing that Mario Nevera came up with was the design of the hardscape here and the steps to the front entrance. Because we were slightly raised, it could have been a very long element to get to the driveway. So we have this sort of middle term landing, followed by other steps that, like the back, are integrated into the lawn itself. So again, no real need for railings here, at least from a code perspective, but it gives us a setting that feels very naturalistic, and it's very practical for maximizing the driveway area that we have. And again, this kind of gives you a sense of what your experience would be if you're approaching our home in the evening, on a winter evening, and to imagine the firelight glimmering in there. It's a very welcoming kind of thing. So I think that kind of wraps our tour for today. I hope you guys enjoyed what you saw. I'm so glad that I could share it with you, and until the next tour. I think the critical aspect for making a house a home is the fact that it brings the homeowner joy. From the very foundation of our design process with anybody, we're investigating what is it that makes you tick, what is it that makes you happy. And happiness has to be the undercurrent that runs through all of these things. Not everybody's going to have the same likes and dislikes, but there's a way to navigate things where we aren't design divas imposing something on you, but we are, we're kind of Sherlock Holmes. We're doing the investigation. We get into understanding who you really are and what a home means to you. And that's different for everybody. So, but what makes it a home for you is what brings you joy. And you should be able to architect you should be able to architect joy into the design process.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to go to homeworthy.com for exclusive content, shopping guides, and so much more.